Today, I am honored to introduce Dr. Andre M. Perry, today's keynote speaker. After Dr. Perry has delivered his keynote remarks, he will be joined on stage by Parissa Fatehi Weeks for a fireside chat. Dr. Perry is a senior fellow at Brookside Institutions, a scholar in residence at American University, and a professor of practice of economics at Washington University. A nationally known and respected commentator on race, structural inequality, and education, Perry is the author of the book, Know Your Price, Valuing Black Lives and Property in America's Black Cities. Perry is a regular contributor to MSNBC and has been published by numerous media outlets, including the New York Times, The Nation, The Washington Post, TheRoot.com, and CNN.com. Perry has also made appearances on HBO, CNN, PBS, NPR, NBC, and ABC. Parissa Fatehi Weeks is the Senior Director of Global Environmental, Social, and Governance Programs and Partnerships for Indeed, where her team aims to transform the world of work to be more equitable and inclusive. Parissa is also an adjunct professor of poverty law at the University of Texas School of Law and spent 7 years leading digital inclusion work at Google. One of her most formative and career experiences was a staff attorney at Public Advocates, a non-for-profit civil rights law firm in San Francisco, where she worked with low-income communities of color for climate justice and equitable housing and transit policies. Prior to that, she was a law clerk for the U.S. District Court in Houston and worked for the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency in Washington, D.C. Parissa serves as board chair for Housing Works Austin and is also known as a board leader for Workers' Defense, an immigrant workers' rights organization in Austin. Please help me welcome Dr. Andre Perry and Parissa Fatehi Weeks.
Amazing. I'm going to jump right into my presentation because I generally introduce myself through it. As was mentioned, I work at the Brookings Institution where I study Black majority cities and neighborhoods. Now, there's obviously too many Black majority neighborhoods to put on a map, but here are the Black majority cities, the places where the share of the Black population is 50% or higher. You can see that lots are concentrated in the South, a lot going up the Eastern Seaboard, some in the Midwest, some on the West Coast. But I study and look for the assets within each and every one of those dots in those cities and in Black majority neighborhoods. The homes, the businesses, the infrastructure, the schools, the things that if you invest in would propel economic mobility and well-being. Now, probably the most important asset you can have is a home. I hope people in this room believe that. But this is where my home, where I grew up in. This is 1320 Hill Avenue, Wilkinsburg, Pennsylvania. Wilkinsburg is a small Black majority municipality surrounded by Pittsburgh on 3 sides. It's been in the news, national news relatively recently because they're starting to consider merging Wilkinsburg with the city of Pittsburgh. There's a lot of activity around where I live. Google set up a headquarters there. But as you can see, this is my home. It's boarded up currently. When I took this picture, it was valued somewhere around $13,000. Now, you can see it's in disrepair. It's boarded up. The roof is bowed. But the home means so much more to me, and I was stupefied to learn it was valued at $13,000, largely because that woman in the upper right-hand corner, her name is Elsie Boyd. I call her Mom. As the story was told to me, before I was born, there was a deal made between Mom and my maternal grandmother that she would take me in to 1320 Hill Avenue. It was actually owned by her son through the GI Bill. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. But she took me in, and she took in a lot of kids. My mother at the time was very poor. She already had a child at 15. Had me when she was 17. She was probably abused. But mom did what a lot of black matriarchs did at that time. She just took in kids if their parents were struggling. She took in a lot of kids. She took in somewhere between 12 to 15 kids. So I generally say I was informally adopted, but some would stay a few months, some would stay a few years. I would stay from birth to graduating from high school. One of the reasons why, my father, who's pictured here, he was a heroin addict. He was in and out of prison. He was eventually murdered inside of Jackson State Penitentiary, which is a prison right outside of Detroit. Growing up, I heard stories about he ended up in prison because of the choices he made. So for my book, Know Your Price, Valuing Black Lives and Property in America's Black Cities, and I see that many of you have them. But for my book, I wanted to look at the built environment in which my father and my mother lived. I wanted to see what the kind of policies impacted those decisions that I heard about. And so, to save you a history lesson, my family lived in, both my mother and my father lived in areas where the federally black homeowners loan corporation drew red lines around predominantly black neighborhoods, deeming them unworthy of various federal investments. They were both displaced by highway construction. Sorry, the fonts are a little bit off, but they were both displaced by various federal highway programs. They were both subjected to the unfulfilled promises of urban renewal. There were restrictive housing covenants all around them. And they could, so they couldn't leave these places. They were also around predatory lending, predators all around. And so I wanted to study the impact of those policies on home prices. And on that x-axis, I'll walk through this with you. On that x-axis, that's the share of the black population in a neighborhood. On the y-axis, that's as indicated by the price on top of the bar. That's the average list price of homes in those neighborhoods. I'm showing you the data from when we first released this in 2018. We updated it last year when the Federal Housing Finance Agency essentially released the appraisal data. But you can see here, homes in homes in neighborhoods where the share of the black population is less than 1%, on average are about $341,000. And as the share of the black population goes up, the price goes down to the point where we're in the neighborhoods that are 50% black or higher, those homes on average are about half as much. Now, a lot of people will say that's because of education, that's because of crime, but those are things you can control for in a study, and that's what we did. We took that absolute price difference, then we controlled for structural characteristics, so square footage, the number of rooms, all the physical manifestations. And then we control for neighborhood amenities, things like education, crime, walkability, all those fancy Zillow metrics, so we can get an apples to apples comparison between homes in black neighborhoods and homes in white neighborhoods. And then what we found pretty much astounds, these numbers are actually higher now, but what we found was that homes in black neighborhoods are still underpriced. After controlling for those factors, there's about 50% difference. After you control for it, it comes to 23, but there's still a whopping gap of about 23%, about $48,000 per home. Cumulatively, there's about $156 billion in lost equity, $156 billion. And this is occurring all over the country. Wherever you see a magenta circle, that's where homes in black neighborhoods are underpriced. Wherever you see a green circle, and there are some, those are places where where homes in black neighborhoods are priced higher than their white counterparts. Houston, so we did not have enough black people in Austin concentrated to make that analysis. But in Houston, the price difference is about 28%, about $53,000 per home. Now, you could see it varies from place to place. I just want to illustrate a few. In Lynchburg, Virginia, if you helicoptered a home in a black neighborhood and placed it in a white neighborhood with similar social circumstances, it would increase in value by 81%. 81%. Rochester, New York, negative 65. Baltimore, or Columbia, the Baltimore suburbs, negative 19. Where I live, the Washington, D.C. metro, about negative 15%. But there are places where homes in black neighborhoods are priced higher. Nashville, plus 10%. Wichita Falls, plus 16. Boston, plus 23. But I always remind people Boston is no less racist than Lynchburg. The home prices are just higher. But I always put this in perspective so that people can understand what this means. What is 156 billion? It would have financed more than 4.4 million black-owned businesses based upon the average amount black people use to start their firms. It would have paid for more than 8 million four-year degrees based upon the average amount of a four-year public education, replaced the pipes in Flint, Michigan 3,000 times over, covered nearly all of Hurricane Katrina damage, and has doubled the annual economic burden of the opioid crisis. It's a big number. The reason why I put that last bullet there is to bring it back home, so to speak. If my father and my mother, adoptive mother, lived in neighborhoods where the home values were at the proper market rate, at the white rate, I should say, my father would have had better resource schools. My father and mother would have had better resource schools because we know how we finance education. A greater opportunity to go to college, greater opportunity to start a business. His life and my life would have been fundamentally different. And this is why I say all the time that there's nothing wrong with black people that ending racism can't solve. When things go wrong in black neighborhoods, we blame black people. We don't look at the policies and practices that extract opportunity without anyone carrying a tiki torch or wearing a white hood. These are everyday practices that just extract wealth from people. Now, I tend to fashion my research after a quote that I heard years ago. A lot of my research falls in this category, but I read something by the Vietnamese philosopher Thich Thich Nhat, who once wrote, if you are growing a head of lettuce and the lettuce isn't growing, you don't blame the lettuce. You look to see if it's getting sunlight. You look to see if the soil's enriched. You look to see if it's getting proper rainwater. You never blame the lettuce. When I'm looking at social problems, particularly around black or brown people, I never blame the lettuce. My research never blames the lettuce. It goes after the structural factors that influence people's lives. And the evidence are there for it. Now, let's see. I'm going to show you a clip. I'm going to set this up. This is Representative Al Green of Texas, of Houston area. Now, when this report that we released came out in 2018, it caused a big stir, particularly in the appraisal industry, as you can imagine. We were called to Congress to testify on the future of the appraisal industry. This is during the Trump administration, so I was the minority voice. No, I mean, metaphorically and in reality, the minority voice, and you had the appraisal industry that kind of represented who the Republicans brought in. And we were asked a very basic question. Do we feel that there's discrimination in the way homes are appraised? Now, I wanted to just give you some background. If there's any one area that we have lots of evidence of discrimination, it's housing, right? For most of America's history, it was legal to discriminate. So I just want to level set there, but I just want you to listen to this exchange.
If you think black people are being discriminated when their property is being appraised, would you kindly raise your hand? One person on the panel. If you think that, for fear that I'm not communicating well, if you think that black people are not being discriminated against when their property is being appraised, if you think they're not being discriminated against, kindly raise your hand. Okay, hands now. We're getting some consternation, I see.
Now, I show that video not to shame anyone. Well, maybe just a little. It's a little, right. No, well, yeah, kind of. But none of the people at the dais is actually in their positions anymore. Since that report has come out, there's been a reckoning around this. The research has been validated and confirmed by a number of other people. We have Freddie and Fannie came out with their own reports confirming the results. I have to say that one of my biggest achievements was the Federal Housing Finance Agency eventually released appraisal data. Because remember, when we first did this, we were using proxy data. We used Redfin, we used Zillow, we used census data, we used a lot of things. They finally released the data, and I'll share some of those findings. But I also share this with you to say there is just a disbelief in this stuff. That you can actually measure the impacts of racism, and you can show the material loss from it. So, so we're up against a lot. Now, I wanted this, before I move on, I wanted to share a few more slides. We've had a lot of success with this data. Like I mentioned, the Federal Housing Finance Agency released appraisal data, and we analyzed it. We know that about 20% of the value gap is due to bad appraisals. Appraisals in black neighborhoods are twice as likely to fall below the contract price. And when they do fall below the contract price, it's about 50% lower. So you know what that means, deals fall through. Most importantly, you have an incredible loss of wealth in black neighborhoods. But it also has an impact on business and business development. We did a similar study looking at the devaluation of businesses because a lot of people will say the lack of black businesses is a lack of quality. I wanted to explore that. Black people represent about 14% of the population, but only 2% of employer firms. That's firms with more than one employee. And so I wanted to explore, okay, why is that? You will hear a lot of anecdotes of the business quality is not good. People don't know how to start businesses well, so we want to explore that. So what we did a similar study. We got the business revenue from Dun & Bradstreet, and we got the race of an owner. We scraped all the Yelp data from businesses across the country to get the level of quality. And then we controlled for neighborhood amenities, so education, spending power. Again, we wanted to get an apples-to-apples comparison. And what we found is that black, brown, and Asian-owned firms actually score higher on Yelp than their white counterparts, but they get less revenue when they're situated in black neighborhoods. So I'll show you this in a second. This slide really illustrates the point. The magenta circle, again, represents black, brown, and Asian-owned firms. The gray line represents white firms. As in all situations, black, brown, and Asian-owned firms actually score higher on Yelp. But look, as the share of the black population increases, the scores go down, and we are assuming here that their customers go down, and they get less revenue as a result. We estimate as upwards of a loss of $4 billion for the top-rated businesses in the country, $4 billion in losses. Now, my black elders used to say, have a phrase for this that I'm going to share with you. They would say all the time, our ice is just as cold. Our ice is just as cold. They were right. The ice is just as cold. But we're not investing in those businesses quite the same. And it's having a harsh effect on the overall development of those communities as a result. I'm going to just close with this, an examination of the wealth gap. Black wealth is actually increasing, and all wealth is increasing in the United States. In fact, there's about a 37% increase in wealth from 2019, according to the Consumer the survey of consumer finances that's issued by the Feds. But the black-white gap has increased significantly. As I mentioned, median black wealth increased from 28,000 to 44,000. And I'll just show you what that looks like over time. The gray area is white wealth. The bottom blue line, if you can see it, that's black wealth. So black wealth is increasing, but so is white wealth at a phenomenal rate. And I'll share with you why. See that orange bar? So you have white wealth on the left, then black wealth, Hispanic wealth, and then other, which is Asian, mostly for the most part. But that middle row, the black wealth, see the big orange bar? That's because black wealth is highly concentrated in two areas. It's housing and business. Now, whereas white wealth is more evenly dispersed through essentially stock market, business equity is one of the biggest returns for white families. And then you have the stock market, housing, and business equities, and then we have other things as well, revenue, obviously, or income as well. But you can see right now, black families are gaining more wealth because why? Housing markets are robust, right? But guess what happens when you're over-concentrated in one area? What happened in 2008? Black wealth was cut in half like that. And I know this might sound crazy speaking to a housing conference, but the conversation for black and brown people in particular has to, when we're talking about wealth of any kind, it has to go beyond housing. We have to see the connection to housing to other forms of wealth creation. Housing equity contributes to business equity. Business equity empowers communities, which in fact gives returns to families, which they can then buy more housing, do more things, have more political participation, all those different things. So I just wanted to share that reality with you, that when we stifle housing, we throttle business development, we hurt communities overall. This is a chart just showing the difference in rises of stock equity versus housing equity. You can see it's very different for black and white households, but I'll move on because I want to get to this conversation. But how do you counter this? There's three things you generally have to do. There's always three things. Whether you're like talking to a business seminar or a church, there's always 3 points, right? You got to invest in people, right? And I'll jump to the second area. If you invest in place, if you only invest in brick and mortar, what happens is property values increase, people can't keep pace, and then they're eventually pushed out. And you see that all over the country, where people want development and deserve development, but they're not getting increases in incomes, in wages, in other things, and they just can't keep pace with the development. Lots of well-meaning activities. You have transportation. I mean, you heard light rail, lots of developments and changing the built environment. But if people aren't seeing a direct benefit from it, eventually they'll be pushed out. So you got to invest in people. And I say this plainly, cut the check. Cut the check to entrepreneurs. You can clap that up. You got to cut the check to entrepreneurs, homeowners, potential homeowners. Find resources to the people in neighborhoods so that they can develop. But again, you do need to invest in place. You do need, because of devaluation, you have wanting infrastructure. You have homes that are in disrepair. So you do need to invest in the physical aspects of a neighborhood. No question about it. And then finally, you got to divest from racism. And I illustrate this by always bringing up the price comparison approach to appraising. If there's one area that I would love to see change, it's that. Because for most of you, you know that to get a average sense of price, appraisers compare one home to another or to a few in a neighborhood to get that average price. Well, that's fraught because if you compare one home to another in a neighborhood that's been discriminated against historically, you just recycle the discrimination over and over again. And that's what I think is happening. So we do need new models. And this is one area I am very open to AI for, because just like Lyft enabled certain vehicles to come into neighborhoods that taxis would not come to in the past, we need that push to those who to look at neighborhoods, black neighborhoods, as lesser. So we need to change that. So that's my presentation. That's what I have. I'm going to get to the conversation. But I just wanted to, before we get in the conversation, I just wanted to share very quickly. Sorry about that. One of the reasons why I'm here is I named the book Know Your Price after my favorite play in the whole wide world, Two Trains Running by August Wilson. And August Wilson, you can clap that up. He's from Pittsburgh. And in the play, there's the main character, Memphis. He's about to have his property seized through eminent domain because they're building the civic arena. This is based around a true story. They're building the civic arena. They're taking all the property around that area. They offer Memphis $15,000 for his property, to which he says, I'm not selling my property for $15,000. I got my price. I know my price. And it's a refrain throughout the play. There's another character, Hambone, who makes a deal with a proprietor. He says, hey, I want to paint your fence if you give me a ham. He paints the fence. He never gets his ham. And throughout the play, there's a refrain, give me my ham, give me my ham, give me my ham. We don't know if he had mental illness before he makes this deal, but eventually he goes mad and dies demanding his ham. Now there's actually a happy ending. I hate telling that part of the story, but there's a happy ending. Memphis, after haggling with the city back and forth over and over again, he gets $35,000 for his property, and it's assumed he's getting the market rate or the white rate. There's two morals of the story, and one is you got to know you have worth. What I try to do with my research is give people the price to stand on, to say, hey, here's what your home should be valued. The other piece is the message I have for you is that it comes from Hambone. If you're doing this work around affordability, around housing equity, around housing justice, and goes to Rona and all the folks doing this great work here in Austin. If you're doing it alone, you will go crazy and die demanding justice. This is work that you cannot do alone. The reason why you're here is to figure out ways to work together to build a better life for many. So I just wanted to leave that charge because there was a lot of great people here doing the good work. Some of you are doing bad work, but most of you are doing most of you are doing good work. But you got to double down on the getting together part. You got to work together. You got to find ways to mobilize, organize, to push for these things to happen, or you will go crazy. Hopefully you won't die, but you will go crazy. But thanks a lot, and I'm looking forward to this conversation.